My casino staff thought they could do whatever they wanted while I was on leave, so I showed up as a homeless junkie. I'd been the owner of a mid-sized casino in Las Vegas. I'd been having owned it for 14 years. I'd been having about 320 employees. I'd been a hands-on owner. I'd been walking the floor every day. I'd been knowing my staff by name. In October last year, I'd been needing to take medical leave. I'd been having had a sudden health issue. I'd been needing surgery. I'd been out for 6 weeks of recovery. I'd been having put my second-in-command in charge. His name had been Reginald. He'd been having been with me for 9 years. He'd been my general manager. He'd been trusted. I'd been having been receiving reports during my recovery. The reports had been from my chief financial officer, Magnolia. She'd been telling me things had been not right. She'd been seeing things in the numbers. She'd been suspecting fraud. By week 4 of my leave, I'd been well enough to investigate, but I'd been not wanting to come back officially yet. I'd been having a plan. I'd been deciding to come back undercover. I'd been having makeup artist Catalina come to my house. She'd been transforming me. She'd been giving me weeks-old clothes. She'd been giving me unwashed hair. She'd been giving me sunken cheeks. She'd been making me look like a junkie. I'd been walking into my own casino as a homeless junkie. I'd been having my driver Theron drop me off 3 blocks away. The security guards had been not letting me in. One of them had been shouting at me. He'd been telling me to leave or be arrested. That security guard had been doing his job. I'd been trying the side entrance. A different security guard had been there. He'd been not even looking up from his phone. He'd been having let me in. I'd been shocked by what I'd been seeing. The casino floor had been filthy. Spills hadn't been cleaned. Trash had been on the floors. Dealers had been on their phones. I'd been watching the blackjack tables. I'd been seeing a dealer named Octavia. She'd been dealing badly. She'd been having a player at her table who'd been clearly her friend. They'd been signaling each other. The dealer had been feeding the player good cards. The player had been winning approximately $35,000 in that hour. I'd been in the bathroom of the casino. A staff member had been in there. He'd been having a uniform on. He'd been a uniformed casino staff member impaired on the job. I'd been going to the manager's office area. I'd been seeing Reginald. He'd been talking to someone. He'd been saying, "We need to move that money before next Friday. The old man is out for at least 2 more weeks." The other person had been saying, "We need to move it to the offshore accounts," like we talked about. Reginald had been saying, "I have it set up. We need approximately 300,000 more to make this worth it. I think I can get there if we keep skimming for another 2 weeks." They'd been talking about embezzlement. I'd been not making a scene. I'd been walking out. I'd been going home. I'd been calling my forensic accountant Persephone the next morning. Within 10 days, Persephone had been having a full report. Reginald and his accomplice, the casino's accountant Hieronymus, had been embezzling from the casino for 14 months. They'd been having moved approximately $1.4 million to offshore accounts. I'd been calling the FBI. I'd been filing reports. I'd been having documentation. I'd been having recordings. I'd been calling a company-wide meeting. I'd been having the meeting in the main casino floor. I'd been on the stage. Reginald had been there. I'd been showing them photos of myself in my disguise. I'd been showing them the security camera footage. I'd been showing them the recording of Reginald talking about moving money. Reginald had been looking sick. Hieronymus had been looking sick. Reginald had been terminated effective immediately. He'd been escorted out by security. The same for Hieronymus. They'd been arrested by the FBI within minutes. The dealer Octavia had been terminated. She'd been banned from the casino for life. I'd been doing a complete overhaul. I'd been hiring new management. The FBI had been prosecuting Reginald and Hieronymus. They'd been convicted. Reginald had been sentenced to 9 years. Hieronymus had been sentenced to 7 years. My casino was now thriving. But last month I'd been receiving a call from a man in federal prison. He'd been a different man named Beauregard Whitmore. He'd been in prison for fraud. He'd been having something to tell me about Reginald, about Reginald's connections, about a network. I'd been deciding I needed to hear what Beauregard Whitmore had to say in person. So I'd been driving out to the federal prison where Beauregard was being held. He'd been serving 12 years for fraud. He'd been having no parole hearing for another 8 years. He'd been having nothing to gain by lying to me. I'd been sitting down across from him in the visiting room, and the first thing he'd been saying to me was, Reginald wasn't freelancing. He was recruited. There's a guy named Weaver Mariani who runs a network. They target mid-sized casinos. They get someone inside, someone trusted, and they bleed the place for a year or two, then move on. I'd been sitting there trying to process that. I'd been asking him how he knew all of this. Beauregard had been leaning back in his chair and saying, because I was part of the same network, different casino. I got caught first. I've been in here for 3 years already. He'd been looking at me like he was reading my face, and then he'd been saying something that made my blood go cold. Reginald used to brag about you, said you'd never figure it out because you trusted him like family. That had been hitting me right in the chest. 9 years I'd been having Reginald by my side, and the whole time, or at least for the last part of it, he'd been laughing about me to people like Beauregard. Then I'd been asking the question that had been keeping me up since his first phone call. Is there anyone still in my casino connected to this network? Beauregard had been going quiet. He'd been looking down at the table. Then he'd been looking back up at me and saying, that's why I called you. Reginald didn't just have Hieronymus. He had someone else. Someone you didn't catch. Someone who's still there. I'd been feeling like the floor had been pulled out from under me. I'd been asking him who it was. Beauregard had been shaking his head. I don't know the name. Reginald never said it. He just called them his insurance policy. Someone who would keep quiet and stay in place even if he went down. I'd been driving home in complete silence. By the time I'd been getting close to home, I'd been knowing I couldn't sit on this. I'd been picking up my phone and calling Magnolia. I'd been telling her everything Beauregard said about Weaver Mariani, about the network, about the insurance policy. Magnolia had been quiet on the other end for a long time. Then she'd been saying something that made the whole thing 10 times worse. I've been seeing something in the last 2 months. Small things. Discrepancies in cash handling reports. I thought it was just sloppy bookkeeping from the new hires. But if what you're telling me is true, it's not sloppiness. Someone is testing the system again. I've been feeling sick. I'd been spending a full year rebuilding that casino. And the whole time, someone had been sitting right there inside my operation, watching me build all of it, learning all of it. I'd been telling Magnolia very clearly, not a single person. You don't tell anyone what we just talked about. If there's a mole, they'll run the second they know we're looking. I'd been hanging up and pulling into my driveway. I'd been sitting in my car with the engine off. I'd been realizing I had to do this again. But the problem was, this time was different. Last time, I'd been able to walk into my own casino in disguise because nobody expected it. But now, every single person on my staff knew what I did. They'd been having seen the photos. They'd been having seen the presentation. I'd been picking up my phone again. This time, I'd been calling Jeff. Jeff had been my best friend for over 15 years. He'd been running a security consulting firm. I'd been telling him everything. The prison visit, Beauregard, Weaver Mariani, the network, the insurance policy. Jeff had been listening to the whole thing without saying a word. Then he'd been saying, "You're not going to find this person by walking the floor in a costume. You need to follow the money. Whoever this is, they're being careful. But careful people still leave patterns. Let me come in, not as your friend, as a consultant. I'll audit your cash handling from the outside. Nobody has to know why." I'd been agreeing. Jeff had been arriving the following week. He'd been coming in looking like any other outside consultant. Polo shirt, clipboard, laptop bag. For 4 straight days, Jeff had been buried in numbers and video. On the 4th day, he'd been asking me to sit down with him in that back office, just the 2 of us, door closed. He'd been saying, "Whoever this person is, they're good, really good. The discrepancies Magnolia noticed are real, but they're tiny. We're talking about $200 to $400 per shift spread across multiple tables. That's designed to look like normal variance. If Magnolia hadn't been paranoid from the first time, nobody would have caught this." I'd been asking Jeff if he could narrow it down to a specific person. He'd been shaking his head. "I can narrow it to a department, but not a person. The money is disappearing from the cage." The cage, the central cash handling area. Jeff had been saying, "That means it's someone with cage access. That's your pool." I'd been going straight to my office after that conversation and pulling the full list of employees with cage access. 14 names. 7 of them had been hired after the whole Reginald disaster. The other 7 had been employees who were already there before everything went down. People who survived the purge. Any single one of them could have been recruited by Reginald at some point during his 9 years with me. 3 days later, Magnolia had been coming to me with something that made everything worse. She'd been walking into my office and closing the door behind her. She'd been saying, "The discrepancies stopped completely. 3 days ago, they just stopped. Somebody got spooked. People who steal for a living develop a sense for when things change around them." I'd been calling Jeff into my office. Jeff had been leaning forward in his chair and saying, "If they've gone quiet, we've lost our trail. Careful people who stop are almost impossible to catch. We need them to start again." Jeff had been having an idea, and I'd been hating it the second he said it. He'd been looking at me and saying, "You need to announce you're taking a short vacation. Make it seem like oversight is loosening up. If they think the pressure is off, they might start again. That's when we catch them." I'd been staring at him like he'd lost his mind. The last time I left my casino, Reginald turned it into his personal piggy bank. Jeff had been holding up his hand. "You don't actually leave. You just make it look like you did. You stay, you watch, but everyone else thinks you're gone." He'd been right. I'd been calling a meeting with my management team the next morning, and I'd been keeping it casual. I'd been telling them I was taking a 10-day trip. I've been going nonstop since I came back from medical leave. I need a reset. I'll be out of pocket for about 10 days. I'd been watching their faces as I said it. Everyone had been looking normal, and one of them, somewhere in that room, or somewhere on my casino floor, had been hearing exactly what they wanted to hear. The boss is leaving. I'd been not going anywhere. I'd been staying at home. I'd been staying in contact with Magnolia on a secure phone line that nobody else knew about. For the first 2 days, nothing happened. But on the 3rd day, my phone had been ringing. It was Magnolia. Her voice had been tight, controlled. She'd been saying, "It started again. The same pattern. 200 to 300 per shift. But I caught something new. The discrepancies are only happening on shifts supervised by one person." She'd been telling me the name, and it had been someone I knew. Someone who had been with my casino for 4 years. Someone who survived the Reginald purge. Someone I looked at during that whole mess and thought, "This one's clean, this one I can keep." I'd been feeling that same sick feeling from before, but this time it had been mixed with something else, something sharper, anger. I'd been telling Magnolia, "Keep watching, document everything, every shift, every number, every discrepancy." I'd been immediately calling Jeff. My voice had been steady but hard. I'd been saying, "I know who it is. Now I need proof that connects them to Weaver Mariani's network, not just to skimming." Jeff had been calling Persephone, the same forensic accountant who cracked the Reginald case open the first time. Persephone had been knowing exactly what to look for because she'd been having already mapped out every trick Reginald and Hieronymus used. And for 6 days, I'd been hearing nothing. 6 days of waiting. I'd been starting to wonder if maybe this person was smarter than Reginald. Then, on the 6th day, my phone had been ringing. It had been Persephone. She'd been sounding excited, the real kind. She'd been saying, "I found it. Small deposits into a secondary bank account. The deposits match the amounts missing from the cage, almost to the dollar. And the account has a recurring transfer going out to a company that doesn't exist. It's a shell, the same kind of shell Reginald used." I'd been gripping the phone so hard my hand hurt. I'd been asking her the most important question. "Does it connect to Weaver Mariani?" Persephone had been pausing for just a second, then saying, "Not directly, not yet, but the shell company shares a registered agent with 2 other shells that are linked to fraud cases in other states. If the FBI follows this thread, they'll find the network." I'd been calling Jeff right away. I'd been saying, "We've got enough. I'm going to call the FBI and hand this over." Jeff had been quiet for a second. Then he'd been saying something that stuck with me. "Good, but be careful about how you do the internal part. Last time you made it a spectacle. Stage, photos, the whole show. That worked because you needed to send a message to 300 people. This time is different. This time, you just need one person to know that you see them." He'd been right. I'd been calling the FBI that same afternoon. The agent I'd been speaking with had been listening to the whole thing, and then he'd been saying something that surprised me. They had already been building a case on Weaver Mariani's network. They'd been tracking it across multiple states. The evidence I was handing them filled a gap they needed. The agent had been asking me for something. He'd been saying, "We need you to hold off on any internal action for 72 hours. We're coordinating with offices in 3 other states. If we move on your end too early, it tips off people in the other locations. 72 hours. I've been going back to my casino the next morning like I'd just gotten home from my fake vacation. I'd been walking through the front door, saying hello to people, shaking hands. And at some point during that first day, I'd been walking right past the suspect employee. I'd been looking them in the face. I'd been smiling. I'd been saying, "Good to see you. How's everything been?" And the whole time, I'd been knowing. I'd been realizing as I walked walked away from that conversation that this was its own kind of disguise. The first time, Catalina had put fake sores on my face and dirt under my nails. That disguise was on the outside, but this one was on the inside. This time, the disguise was my own calm expression. The second night had been when things got tense. I'd been walking down the hallway near the back offices, and the suspect employee had been coming the other direction. They'd been stopping to chat. Normal stuff at first, but then they'd been pausing. Their face had been changing just a little, and they'd been saying, "Is everything okay? You seem different since you got back from your trip." My stomach had been tightening. I'd been feeling this cold wave move through my chest, but I'd been keeping my expression still. I'd been keeping my voice easy. I'd been saying, "Everything's great, just good to be back." They'd been nodding slowly. Then they'd been smiling and saying, "Good, glad you got some rest." And then they'd been walking away. I'd been standing in that hallway watching them go, and I'd been realizing something that made me so angry I had to clench my jaw to keep it off my face. This person had been doing the exact same thing to me for years. They'd been hiding behind the same kind of mask I was wearing right now. The only difference was I'd been doing it for 72 hours. They'd been doing it for 4 years. The morning of that 72nd hour, my phone had been ringing at 7:15. It was the FBI. The agent had been telling me they were ready. Simultaneous operations were happening in 3 states. He'd been saying, "2 agents will arrive at your location at 11 this morning. We need the subject in a contained area at that time. Can you make that happen?" I'd been saying yes. I'd been immediately calling Magnolia. I'd been telling her, "I need you to schedule a routine meeting with them in the small conference room next to my office, 11 o'clock sharp." Magnolia had been quiet for a second. Then she'd been asking, "Routine meeting about what?" I'd been saying, "Cash handling review, quarterly audit, keep it boring, keep it normal." At 10:45, I was in my office. Jeff was sitting across from me. Persephone's report was on my desk in a sealed envelope. At 10:50, the 2 FBI agents came through the back entrance. They walked into my office, introduced themselves quietly, and stood off to the side. At 11, I heard Magnolia's voice in the hallway. She brought the suspect employee into the conference room and sat down across from them with a clipboard. I could see them through the glass partition. Magnolia was going through cash handling procedures, asking basic questions, and the employee was relaxed, leaning back a little, treating it like the boring routine check I told Magnolia to make it look like. I let 3 minutes pass. Then I stood up, walked to the conference room door, and opened it. The suspect employee looked up. I walked in and sat down across from them. I placed Persephone's report on the table, but I didn't open it. I looked right at them and said, "I know about the account. I know about the shell company. I know about Weaver Mariani. And I know Reginald told you to stay quiet and keep going even after he went to prison." Their face changed. Not a lot, just a small shift around the eyes, a tightening in the jaw. They said, "I don't know what you're talking about." I opened the report. I slid the first page across the table so it was right in front of them. Their secondary bank account, the deposits, the transfers. I said, "This is you. Every dollar, every date, every transfer." Persephone found it, the same accountant who found Reginald. They stared at that paper. Their hands went flat on the table and they didn't move. I said, "You had 4 years to come to me. You could have told me Reginald pressured you. You could have said you were scared. I would have listened. Instead, you kept stealing from me after he was already in prison. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." They finally spoke. Their voice was low, almost a whisper. "You don't understand. Weaver doesn't let people just stop. You don't walk away from him." I said, "You could have walked to me. You chose not to." I stood up and opened the conference room door. The 2 FBI agents walked in. They showed their badges. They read the suspect employee their rights. The employee was handcuffed right there at the table. Then the agents walked them out through the back hallway, away from the casino floor, away from every other employee in the building. No spectacle, no stage, no photos on a screen. Just 2 agents and a quiet walk out the back door. I stood in that hallway and watched until they were completely gone. Jeff was standing next to me. Neither of us said a word for a long time. Then Jeff said, "That's it. That's the last one." I shook my head slowly. That's what I thought last time. The FBI's coordinated raids across 3 states had been successful. Weaver Mariani's network had been dismantled completely. Weaver himself had been arrested and charged with racketeering and conspiracy. Reginald, already serving 9 years, had been having additional charges filed against him. I'd been never speaking to Beauregard again, but I'd been sending him a short letter. All it said was, "Thank you for the call." I'd been sitting in my office late that night after everyone had gone home. Magnolia had been stopping by on her way out. She'd been saying, "You did it again." I'd been saying, "No, we did it. You saw it first, both times." She'd been nodding and leaving. I'd been looking out at the empty casino floor through my office window. The lights were still on. The machines were still humming. Everything looked the same as it always had. But I was different. I didn't trust the silence anymore, and I'd been deciding that was not a weakness. It was the thing that would keep me standing.